This is Malcolm Shabazz, grandson of Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz, through their daughter Kabila Shabazz. She was one of the witnesses to Malcolm X's assassination in 1965, when she was just 4 years old. Malcolm Shabazz and the story of his life, as well as his strange murder in Mexico City, has largely been unknown. Shabazz was born in Paris, France on October 8, 1984, to an Algerian man. Shabazz had a difficult upbringing. He never knew his father and struggled with mental health issues throughout his childhood. He lived in several different cities as a child, having a difficult time making friends. He was also described as a pyromaniac. At 3 years old, Malcolm set fire to his own shoes and soon became obsessed with fires, something that would later come to change his entire life. In the 3rd grade, he brought knives to school, and teachers described him as having delusional thoughts and was even hospitalized for a short time due to these troubles. In 1995, 9-year-old Malcolm would have to witness the arrest of his mother Kabila due to her trying to hire a hitman to assassinate Louis Farrakhan. She believed that Farrakhan was responsible for the death of her father. An FBI informant tricked Kabila into thinking he was an assassin and even built up a relationship with young Malcolm, even Malcolm calling him, quote, the father he never had. Kabila accepted a plea deal and would avoid jail time as part of the deal, but she would have to undergo psychological counseling and drug and alcohol treatment. 11-year-old Malcolm later moved to New York to live with his grandmother, Betty Shabazz, the wife of Malcolm X. Malcolm would frequently jet between New York and Texas, visiting his mother whenever possible. Kabila married while she was undergoing treatment, but the marriage was toxic and ended quickly. Despite this, Malcolm bonded well with his stepfather, but after the divorce, Malcolm once again lost that father figure he so desperately craved. Quickly after the divorce, Malcolm and his mother would frequently fight, and sometimes the fights would become physical. In one instance, Malcolm's mother called the police on him, telling the police that she wanted young Malcolm committed to a mental institution. After being admitted, he would quickly be released. Soon after, Malcolm and his mother once again had a physical altercation, and this time, Malcolm called the police on himself. Because of the horrible relationship he had with his mother, Malcolm would be sent back to New York to live with his grandmother, Betty. I said earlier that Malcolm was described as a pyromaniac, obsessed with starting fires. This obsession would lead to an event that would change his life forever. On June 1st, 1997, 12-year-old Malcolm was still living in Betty Shabazz's apartment when he doused the apartment in gasoline and set it on fire. Betty would be severely burned, suffering burns on over 80% of her body. Betty had no idea it was her grandson that started the fire and attempted to save him. Malcolm left the apartment covered in gasoline and barefoot wandering the streets. The police found him in a disturbed state and apprehended him. 22 days later, Betty died in a hospital from her injuries after doctors attempted 5 skin grafts to save her life. Due to his young age, the criminal case was kept from the public. Former Mayor of New York David Dinkins and Manhattan Borough President Percy Sutton represented Shabazz at the trial, saying to the judge that while Malcolm did start the fire, he meant no harm to his grandmother. Shabazz's 2 lawyers tried to arrange for him to be admitted to an institution that would help Malcolm with his troubled mental health. This did not happen. Shabazz ultimately pled guilty and was sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile detention center. During his sentence, he attempted to escape 3 times. Due to his repeated escapes, he would serve a total of 4 years instead of 18 months he was supposed to serve. In a 2003 interview, 18-year-old Shabazz gave his version of the events leading up to the fire. He said that he was unhappy living with his grandmother. I set a fire in the hallway, and I didn't think the whole thing through thoroughly. But she didn't have to run through that fire. There was another way out of the house from her room. I guess what she thought was I was stuck and she had to run and get me because it was in front of my room as well. She ran through the fire. I did not picture that happening, that she would do that. Expressing regret for his actions, Malcolm said he would sit in his jail cell and ask for a sign of forgiveness from his dead grandmother. He also admitted that he would fake hearing voices in his head as a child in order to get attention. As you can imagine, many people were not happy after hearing this interview. He would continue to get in trouble with the law. He would serve 3.5 years in prison for armed robbery after trying to steal $100 from a man. Again, he was arrested in 2006 for punching a hole in a store window of a donut shop in Yonkers. But it was after this arrest that Malcolm would turn a new leaf and follow in his father's footsteps and convert to Islam. In 2010, he made the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. Things were finally starting to look up for Malcolm. Malcolm would become an activist. He went to Mexico City with labor activist Miguel Suarez, who led a tour to demand for better wages and more rights for Mexican construction workers living in the U.S. Suarez and Shabazz were lured to a bar on Friday, May 9, 2013, in the tourist part of Mexico City known as Garibaldi Plaza. During the night, the bar's owner sent two waiters, Manuel Alejandro Perez and David Hernandez Cruz, and demanded Shabazz pay the $1,200 tab. Many of the bars in this area of Mexico City are notorious for overcharging and scamming foreigners, especially black foreigners. Shabazz refused to pay, and the two owners took Shabazz out behind the bar, robbed and beat him with a metal rod, and abandoned him on a nearby street. Malcolm was taken to the hospital for his injuries, where he died shortly after due to blunt force trauma. Weeks later, the two waiters were arrested by Mexican authorities for the murder, and in 2015 were both sentenced to 27 years in prison. In 2014, another waiter was arrested while in hiding. At the time of his death at just 28 years old, it seemed that Shabazz had been turning his life around. He had avoided any legal trouble for over 7 years and had embraced his lineage to Malcolm X and wanted to follow in his footsteps as an activist. He had plans to construct several mosques and schools throughout America, as well as set up programs to help the youth stay away from drugs and gangs. We will never truly know what he could have been if he was still alive today. The media was still fixated on the fire in 1997. Many of the articles written about him mostly talked about what he did at 13 years old. His body was flown back to New York, where he is buried now at Ferncliff Cemetery, near his grandparents Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz.